In a world where people pretend everything is fair, peaceful, and equal, Machiavelli would laugh. He would tell you that modern life is a battlefield disguised as a polite conversation. Power plays happen in your home, in your workplace, in your group chats, in every negotiation, every argument, and every opportunity you fail to seize. And if you're not planning like a mastermind, striking like a warrior, and conquering like a king, then someone else is, and you're the one being outmaneuvered. Today, we're diving straight into how Machiavelli himself would operate in your real-life situations: parenting, school, family drama, workplace politics, and modern business deals. No sugarcoating. No history lessons. Just today's reality. If you're ready to understand how power truly works in the world you live in right now, stay until the end, because this might be the most brutally honest guide you'll ever hear. A tired parent comes home to a living room turned battlefield, toys everywhere, a teenager slammed a door, and two younger kids yelling over a tablet. Machiavelli in modern clothes would not plead for calm or moralize about family values. He would take stock: who holds influence in the house, which child's temper sparks others, which parents' reactions escalate or diffuse. He would set immediate, measurable rules that cut through the noise, a clear evening routine enforced the same way every night, consequences that are inevitable, not threats that evaporate, and a visible system for privileges tied to behavior. He'd use authority strategically, not to bully, but to make order predictable so children stop using chaos as a tool. He'd also create small public wins, chores completed, a family dinner where each one contributes, that shift the household narrative from anarchy to structure. In short, Machiavelli would convert emotional drama into predictable systems, because predictability concentrates power in the parent who enforces it. When siblings constantly compete for attention and a family argument explodes over minor slights, Machiavelli would ignore moral lectures and focus on incentives. He'd identify the currency everyone responds to: attention, screen time, allowance, the right to choose dinner, and rewire the competition to cooperative goals. Instead of asking children to be nicer, he'd design contests that reward teamwork, shared rewards for shared responsibilities. If adults are fighting, he wouldn't call for compromise as an ideal. He would map out leverage, who needs what from whom, and enforce floor and ceiling terms so conversations stop being landmines. He'd be ruthless about symmetry: if someone yells, they lose a privilege immediately. This isn't cruelty, it's curation of consequences so that emotional outbursts no longer deliver benefits or attention. Imagine a parent faced with a child failing classes because they prioritize social media and late-night gaming. Machiavelli would treat the child's attention like territory to be seized, not a problem to be sympathized with. He'd remove the audience for late-night behavior by setting accountabilities tied to school performance: no devices until homework, and a study report system where the child must demonstrate what they learned that day. He'd use small, time-bound penalties and immediate rewards to retrain habits, exchange dopamine from likes for dopamine from tangible achievement. He'd also leverage social proof, aligning the child with peers who study, making excellence the status symbol in the household. Machiavelli would not pretend moral suasion works. He'd restructure the environment so that the rational move is to study. When a teenager lies about grades or hides failures, Machiavelli would not look for emotional explanations first. He would treat the lie as a signal of incentives gone wrong. He'd rebuild incentives so truth-telling no longer leads to punishment that invites concealment. Instead of threatening, he'd offer a predictable pathway. Honest report leads to a plan and support, deception leads to loss of autonomy. That way the child learns that transparency is advantage, not liability. He'd simultaneously model strategic honesty, admitting small parental missteps when beneficial, to normalize truth as the currency of power and progress. In the middle of a heated co-parenting battle over discipline styles, Machiavelli would cut through identity politics and define the non-negotiables: safety, schooling, and crucial routines. He'd push both parents to agree publicly on core rules and sign them as a compact, making violations visible and accountable. If one parent undermines the other, Machiavelli would use structural fixes, documented schedules, third-party mediators, or agreed consequences for rule-breaking. His approach is blunt: stop performing righteousness and start producing stability. The child's behavior improves only when caretakers present a united, predictable front, at a parent-teacher meeting where a child is on the brink of being overlooked. Machiavelli would instruct the parent to treat the teacher like a stakeholder negotiating outcomes. He would prepare, show documented work, ask exact questions, and propose realistic interventions while offering help in return, such as volunteer time or resources. He'd position the parent not as a supplicant but as a strategic partner who brings value. If the school resists, Machiavelli would escalate through clear channels: principals, school boards, with evidence, deadlines, and a willingness to change schools if terms aren't met. His stance is pragmatic: systems respond to pressure, you get what you press for. When a child is bullied and the school offers vague promises, Machiavelli would demand immediate, enforceable actions and craft a protective strategy. He'd map the bully's social network, identify allies, and create counter-incentives that make bullying socially costly and isolation expensive. He would coach the child in subtle power moves, confident posture, one-line comebacks, boundary setting, not as fake bravado but as tools that change others' calculations. If institutional responses are weak, he'd push for changes in policy with other parents until the school's incentive structure forces accountability. Machiavelli would treat safety as non-negotiable and aggression as a problem to be repriced. At home, when toddlers constantly test limits and parents slip between permissiveness and rage, Machiavelli would prescribe structural discipline that eliminates ambiguity. He'd create repetitive rituals, bedtime, meals, discipline phrases, that are enforced by one parent consistently to avoid mixed signals. He'd also create symbolic gestures, a family calendar visible to all, a consequence jar, that convert rules into visible assets and liabilities. He would break the cycle of reactive parenting by making compliance the default through environmental design: toys put away, clear transitional cues, and immediate, predictable consequences that teach cause and effect faster than lecture ever could. In a household where one partner resents the other for shouldering chores, Machiavelli would not counsel check-ins and vulnerability as the first step. He would map bargaining chips. He would set up clear reciprocal obligations with measurable outcomes, chore credits, evening protections, and a weekly review where wins are recorded and grievances are met with remedial tasks. He'd institutionalize fairness through transparent accounting so resentment can be negotiated like a contract instead of festering as passive aggression. Machiavelli's point: domestic peace is maintained by systems of exchange, not moral entreaties. At school, when parents debate whether to push a gifted child harder or let them relax, Machiavelli would weigh leverage and opportunity. He'd treat the child's talent like capital that can be invested or squandered. He'd set aggressive but realistic milestones and structure the child's environment to favor growth: curated tutors, peer groups that challenge, and high-visibility projects that build reputation. If the child resists, he'd create consequences for complacency and rewards for discipline. He'd also protect against burnout with scheduled rest that's framed as a strategic tool, not indulgence, because a planned recovery is a tactic to sustain conquest. When a student is up against group project freeloaders, Machiavelli would act like a CEO, consolidating responsibility and ensuring accountability. He'd establish roles, public deadlines, and a method to grade individual contributions, and he'd make non-performers' names public to the group and the professor when necessary. He'd counsel the student to document all communications. This is leverage in disputes. If the professor remains passive, Machiavelli would escalate to higher authorities with the paperwork ready. His principle, responsibility without enforcement is a vacancy that others will exploit. In an office where credit is stolen and promotions feel arbitrary, Machiavelli would stop pretending niceness is a strategy and start tracking influence. He'd coach you to document wins, to cultivate one or two high-level sponsors, and to make your contributions visible in ways that cannot be repackaged by others. He'd teach you to control narratives, write status updates, present concise weekly reports, and own your successes publicly while delegating visible portions of projects strategically. If someone takes credit, he'd advise a direct, public correction that reclaims the narrative without burning bridges. For Machiavelli, visibility equals security, invisibility equals being eaten. When a manager plays favorites and the team morale tanks, Machiavelli would diagnose incentives and realign them. He'd push for transparent criteria for raises and promotions and would make success a function of measurable outcomes, not personal rapport. He'd counsel employees to form coalitions around professional standards, not gossip, and to present a united request for policy changes with evidence of lost productivity. Machiavelli would also tell ambitious employees to quietly cultivate mentors in other departments to diversify their power, because relying on a single biased manager is a strategic weakness. If a colleague undermines you in meetings, Machiavelli would recommend a two-step approach: expose pattern, not person, and seize control of the next interaction. He'd instruct you to prepare crisp, evidence-based rebuttals and to follow up meetings with written summaries that cement your position. He'd teach you to turn attacks into opportunities, invite the critic to collaborate on a solution that puts you in charge of implementation. That way you neutralize theater and transform conflict into a demonstration of competence. Machiavelli's playbook here is to convert aggression into a showcase of authority. When an employee must ask for a raise in an economy where companies string people along, Machiavelli would not plead, he would prepare leverage. He'd gather metrics of impact, a list of comparable market rates, and a timeline showing how replacement would cost the company. He'd choose the moment post-success, not during budget season, and he'd present a clear alternative: a raise, a title change, or a severance package. If the company refuses, he'd be ready to walk. The willingness to leave is the real negotiating power. Machiavelli sees scarcity of options as weakness, making leaving plausible become strength. Facing toxic workplace drama where rumors spread, Machiavelli would treat reputation as a battlefield and pattern as the weapon. He'd document every interaction that could be weaponized and proactively control the narrative by consistently demonstrating competence and calm. He'd build alliances with neutral but respected colleagues who can vouch for him publicly. If a rumor threatens promotion, Machiavelli would take it to HR with proof, but he'd also undermine rumor by making his day-to-day performance incontrovertible. His view: silence plus steady excellence is often the best antidote to slander. In a negotiation where a business partner promises favor but keeps delaying, Machiavelli would stop being polite and start enforcing deadlines and penalties. He'd convert vague commitments into signed milestones with payment triggers and escape clauses. He'd also set up public accountability, such as announcing joint milestones to clients or stakeholders, so stalling becomes visible and costly. If the partner still stalls, Machiavelli wouldn't hesitate to restructure the deal unilaterally if contracts allow, or to walk with a prepared alternative. For him, trust without enforceability is just a trap. When a founder faces investors who want control in exchange for cash, Machiavelli would approach this like partitioning territory. He would map what control matters: board seats, veto rights, dilution thresholds, and trade equity only for clauses that preserve decision-making power where it counts. He'd use staged funding to maintain leverage and would include clawbacks and performance-based milestones for investors too. If pressured, he'd be ready with alternative funding options or a plan to bootstrap, because handing over the kingdom for short-term capital is a common fatal mistake. If a partner wants to renegotiate terms after a deal is signed because market conditions changed, Machiavelli would renegotiate from a position of prepared alternatives and clear consequences. He'd have already built escape valves into contracts and maintained relationships that allow quick pivoting. If the other side acts opportunistically, he'd call the bluff publicly within the professional community, making the cost of bad faith behavior reputationally high. Machiavelli's lesson, make betrayal expensive by ensuring the world watches. When a small business owner faces a supplier raising prices unexpectedly, Machiavelli would treat supply relationships like territorial pacts, not friendships. He'd diversify suppliers, lock favorable terms into longer contracts with penalty clauses for unilateral hikes, and, crucially, maintain a small reserve to tolerate shocks. He'd also use transparency, communicate the supplier's move to customers with a plan that shares pain while protecting margins, turning vulnerability into credibility. For Machiavelli, redundancy and contingency plans are the backbone of sustainable power. In a family deal where an in-law asks for a business favor that could compromise the core enterprise, Machiavelli would separate blood from business. He'd set strict contractual boundaries, proof of performance benchmarks, and clear exit strategies. He'd avoid vague promises and insist on terms that protect minority ownership and decision rights. If the in-law resists, he'd call the social cost, status in the family in exchange for respecting business protocols. He'd manage both the relationship and the company ruthlessly but fairly because mixing sentiment and commerce is the fastest route to ruin. When a startup co-founder disputes equity split and roles because success brings pressure, Machiavelli would not aim for idealism but for enforceable structures, vesting schedules, formal role definitions, and escalation paths. He'd make sure decisions are not dependent on goodwill but on agreed metrics. If a co-founder consistently fails to meet commitments, Machiavelli would use the contract to reallocate responsibilities or equity before resentment destroys the venture. His priority: protect the enterprise from emotional volatility. Finally, when you yourself feel stuck between playing nice and playing for everything, Machiavelli would tell you plainly, choose the strategy that preserves your long-term agency. He'd have you audit where your power actually lies: skills, network, money, reputation, and then act to strengthen the scarce resource. In parenting, that means structuring the home so your authority persists. In school, it means turning effort into visible credentials. In work, it means making your contributions undeniable. In deals, it means making agreements enforceable. He would strip away comforting illusions about fairness and ask one brutal question: does this action improve your position tomorrow? If yes, do it with precision. If no, don't waste emotional currency on it. If there's one thing Machiavelli would want you to remember, it's this: the world doesn't reward the passive. It doesn't reward the emotional. And it never rewards the unprepared. It rewards the calculated, the strategic, the disciplined, and the ones who take control of their environment before it consumes them. Whether it's raising children, navigating school politics, commanding respect at work, or negotiating business deals, power belongs to those who understand the game and dare to play it with intention. If this video opened your eyes or gave you clarity on how to move differently in today's world, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support tells the algorithm this content matters, and it helps this channel reach more people who need these truths. Until the next one, stay sharp, stay strategic, and stay in control.